do that. I will ask each candidate to introduce themselves. We'll ask you to do it in 1 minute. We'll start with Alex and work our way across. When we start questions, I will start from the back of the alphabet, and then each successive question, I will continue to start from the person after them. You don't have to answer the questions, or you can pass, but choose to do what you'd like with it. So Alex, can you please introduce yourself in 1 minute?
Yes, my name is Alex Kamsa. I moved to Palo Alto in 2010 for a couple of reasons. The diversity of our community and also the sense of the community as well. We should feel privileged that we live in one of the best places on this planet. Some things have changed over the last few years, but we can fix those. I'm running for city council for a few reasons: affordable housing, small businesses, public safety, and definitely climate change. I'm an open-minded, data-driven person, and I use common sense. I actually run for change for my expertise and for common sense. And I'm truly delighted to be part of this climate change forum, and I truly appreciate the efforts that these young individuals have put into this event. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, my name is Lisa Forcell. I am running for a welcoming, sustainable, and affordable Palo Alto. What this translates into for my campaign priorities is number one, housing, building new homes of all sizes to welcome new folks and support those already here. Number two, transportation options, bike infrastructure, shuttles, and ties to regional transit. Number three, climate, modernizing neighborhoods to convert to clean electric power over natural gas. I've served as a commissioner on the Utilities Advisory Commission for 6 years, including 2 as chair. I have 20 years of experience in technology and creativity at Pixar and Apple, where I'm known as someone who lifts the team up and gets the project done. I am passionate about public service and excited to serve. I have a master's degree in environment and resources and an MBA from Stanford. I'm proud to be endorsed by many local leaders, and I'm excited for tonight's forum. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Brian?
Hi, I'm Brian Hamachek. I was born at Stanford Hospital. I went to Walter Hayes for elementary school, which is also where I met my future wife. Then I went to Green Middle School, Jordan at the time, and then Palo Alto High. I've lived here pretty much my entire life, except for a few years. This is more than a city to me. This is definitely my home. I love Palo Alto. I think that there's some really pivotal times ahead for the city, and the decisions that are made are going to really influence what Palo Alto is going to be like 25, 50 years from now. And I'd like to be a part of that discussion and those decisions. So that's why I'm running. Thanks.
Thank you. Ed?
Ed Lowing, thanks to the host, and thanks to Pastor Smith for not only moderating, but all the wonderful ongoing work you do on the HRC as the chair. I've lived here 34 years. My primary objectives are climate, public safety, and housing. I have proven my commitment to the community over the last couple of decades in community service. I've proven my commitment to the government with 13 years of experience on commissions on a breadth of issues across 2 commissions, planning and parks. I have decades of business skills. I'm happy to say that as of this morning, the Mercury News also added that Ed has also built a well-deserved reputation for being able to bring people together on challenging issues in their morning endorsement. So that combination of ingredients is just different than other candidates for you to look at. What I bring is I've been there, done that, and I would urge you to vote for experience and results. And so I respectfully ask for your vote in that regard.
Doria?
Good evening, everyone, and thank you for bringing us here today. So my name is Doria Suma. I moved here 37 years ago from Chicago, and I really consider that I've been an environmentalist my whole life. I became a vegetarian when I was 14, and that was partly love of animals and partly an understanding of the meat production harms the environments. And my high school was the first entity in the Chicago area to have a recycling program. So I've been a volunteer for 15 years on various boards and commissions, currently serving as vice chair of the Planning Commission, When I was on the comp plan group, I was in the subcommittees that focused on land use and the natural environment, and I worked hard to create better policies within those. I was also recently one of 7 community volunteers that worked on the new tree ordinance that will protect more trees and sequester more carbon and create habitat for native species.
Thank you. And Vicky?
Thank you, Reverend Smith, 350 Palo Alto, CCL, and particularly our student climate activists. I'm Vicki Vinker, and my climate interest goes back to when I was majoring in biochemistry and political science at Indiana University and met with the renowned Linton Caldwell, who is the architect of both the National Environmental Policy Act and the Environmental Impact Statement. That amazing experience stayed with me when I was practicing law, and I volunteered to do pro bono work for the Natural Resources Defense Council. In 2016, I highlighted climate action in my assembly campaign and earned endorsements from groundbreaking environmentalists like Congressman Pete McCloskey, State Senator Byron Scher, and State Senator Fran Pavley. In this race, I'm the only candidate endorsed by both the Sierra Club and the League of Conservation Voters. Our climate can't wait. I'm eager to work with tonight's sponsors to transition away from fossil fuels, reduce emissions, and get carbon back down to 350 parts per million. Thank you.
Thank you so much. At this time, we're going to ask Maya Prakash if she can come forward. She will be asking the first question. We ask that each candidate please just take 1 minute in the response to this. Maya?
If elected, which 3 policies would you focus on implementing to meet the city's 80 by 30 goals?
And we'll start with Vicky.
Well, first, a large amount of our greenhouse gases come from buildings, so electrification of buildings is key. We already require it of new residences, so we'll need to add transitioning commercial and residential buildings. For example, I support the heat pump water heater program that council approved on Monday night. Second, 60% of Palo Alto's remaining greenhouse gas emissions are from vehicles. So I support increasing EV charging stations equitably throughout our city, including in multifamily buildings, and encouraging charging at off-peak hours. Third, I would say making investments in infrastructure to assure the reliability and resilience of our electric grid as demand increases because of the first 2 things. And I would encourage that demand to shift to off-peak hours through the use of smart meters, and over time, modernizing transformers and substations so that we can have a smart grid that can even do things like 2-way charging. I also want to advocate for sufficient workforce to build and maintain it.
Thank you. Doria?
Thank you. So it's a huge priority to do this, and I think we can, and I think we have to. So the first thing we have to do is encourage and transition to electric and get rid of gas eventually, but we do need to update our grid. Our grid is not going to be able to handle it. So we need to make smart decisions with our budget so we can really get that grid up to speed. I'm really excited about the new water treatment plant. We need to reuse water. We can't just consider a drought a thing that happens occasionally, like every 10 years. We really have to plan for water use and reusing water, period, now, all the time. So I'm very excited about that. I think reach codes for buildings that have smarter building development and standards will be very important, and more bike and ped options, especially connections across the tracks.
Thank you so much. Ed?
Okay, 3 things. First of all is definitely the grid. I've been saying on the campaign trail that the grid is the elephant in the room, and I think I finally outed that elephant. We absolutely have to address that and address it quite quickly, because that provides the essential capacity that we need, but it also provides the essential confidence that residents need to step up to more electricity instead of gas. The second thing, as the question was asked, what would I pass? What I would pass did pass happily last Monday night. The updated SCAP plan was passed by council, which I fully support, and they covered the current situation. They covered concrete pilots. They covered a roadmap of how to go forward here. address both housing and transportation and all the changes that are needed, commercial electrification, home electrification, and EV chargers. The last thing I want to mention as a parks guy and an endorsed Sierra Club is that we have to step up against sea level rise and do it right now.
Thank you. Brian?
Yeah, I think the first thing we have to do is work on the utilities and make sure that the foundation is there for all these other things that we want to do. And that includes not just increasing the capacity, but also smart meters and just more efficient usage overall. And once we have that in place, or even before it's done, we need to get more EV chargers throughout the city so that it's just everywhere. You can have an electric vehicle, you park anywhere and you can charge. Beyond that, I would also support building new housing, at least prioritizing it towards where the jobs are so that people don't even have to drive. Just eliminate that altogether, let them walk to work.
Thank you so much. Lisa?
The thing that we have the most control over as a city is our natural gas utility. So the top policy priority for me would be to move strongly towards winding down the natural gas utility for single family homes and certain multifamily and commercial buildings. Obviously, we have to simultaneously update our grid infrastructure to handle it. I do want voters to know this is something I would actively push for if they vote for me. We need to move our transportation away from gas-powered cars, bike infrastructure, transit, restarting and expanding the shuttle and building those grade separations. And finally, housing. I'm excited to build 800 units per year of all electric housing to eliminate the carbon footprint of long commutes for the people who work here and allow them to enjoy an efficient, low carbon quality of life right here in town.
Thank you so much. And Alex?
Yes, we are dealing with the water crisis, and one of the things we could do at the city level to build up a department within the city to handle the water storage. About 25% of the water we need is actually falling on our roofs, and I believe we can have a better water storage management system in place. The drinkable water is actually about 25% of how much water we need, which is the amount of water that falls on our roofs. Second, I would like to see incentives for electric appliances. And I will elaborate about that more on the second question. And investing in the electrical grid in conjunction with incentives for credits for new homes, since especially the ones close to transit hubs, those small homes with small footprints will have a huge effect long-term on the climate. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Right now, we have the next question by Maya. We're going to give each person 2 minutes because we're a little bit ahead of schedule, so everybody can answer it if we keep it under 2 minutes. And we'll start with, after Maya, we'll start with Doria.
Upgrading our electric grid will be a time-consuming proposition if we take a business-as-usual approach. What ideas do you have to expedite the process given our limited jurisdiction? Specifically, what do you see as the role of local generation and distributed energy resources, including demand management and enhancing grid resilience, emergency response, and real sustainability of the city's energy supply as we inevitably move away from renewable energy certificates and offsets? And to repeat the question, as I know what I said was just long, what ideas do you have to expedite the process of decarbonizing given our limited jurisdiction?
Thank you. That was a long question. So we already know we have to electrify. That means cars, car chargers made available, and electrifying our buildings to transition away from gas. I mentioned earlier more bike ped opportunities. Part of the rail plan is to have 3 or 4 crossings. And I think those should be done first. We've needed those for years anyway to make it easier for people to get across town in that direction, our east-west connections. And I believe that they'll be absolutely necessary when we do grade separations, and we'll encourage people to use that form of getting around instead of cars. I'm also excited that the FAA just approved a new fuel for small airplanes that I think it's called GL100UL, which is high octane and unleaded. So I'm looking forward to that being available at our airport. I also think we should keep in mind the idea of environmental justice. Not everyone lives in a place that is well served, or there are less wealthy communities. And we have to make sure that we take care of all the people in the community, don't leave people behind. We might have to have some sort of assistance switching to appliances. Just today on the news, I heard about Bayview, Hunters Point area, which has radioactive toxic waste, which will be pushed up by sea level rise. So we have to move people and help people at lower income levels as part of this whole environmental movement. Another example was 9 big diesel generators that were unpermitted in an Oakland neighborhood, very, very polluting, that were allowed to continue being operate without being permitted for years. And it took quite a long time to get that situation solved. So we need to do better.
Thank you so much. Ed?
Yeah, thanks. I think the right process has already been started to be put into place. It really is a combination of money, investment, subsidy, whatever you want to call it, plus multiple pilots to basically see what works. And when that gets done, you have some information to either roll out or make adjustments and keep going for all residents. So I think that process has begun. On buildings, there are barriers to adoption. And with respect to residential, retrofitting existing residential is a big deal economically. Lower income people are not going to start taking out loans to do this, even if they qualify for them. And so it has to be pretty much 100% subsidized. And we just need to step up to that reality and not duck on that and fool people. So that's the first thing. Secondly, and similar, it's not that different in older homes. I met a woman in the campaign trail. Well, she wanted to put in an effectively electric furnace, and it was $8,000 to $10,000 before she got to having to retrofit her old home. And she grit her teeth and wrote her check for $5,000 and put in another gas furnace and didn't feel good. So it's the same situation there. We have to subsidize this if we really want it to happen. And secondly, on transportation, that's a bit easier. We're already doing great on electric cars. And I think that trend is going to continue. Obviously, it needs more EV chargers, as we've all said already tonight, and will some more. I would also like to see the transportation demand management system have teeth in it. So we're making corporations make sure they're looking out for that and reducing vehicle miles traveled in that way. And with respect to housing, yes, it needs to be near transit. We'll talk about that when we get to housing. And I'd like to see serious shuttles, not just, town and country to downtown and back, but a real full shuttle system. And lastly, I just want to mention that to decarb things, there are now better building materials. And I'd like to see that legislated. So we use more green materials, wood and carbon-free concrete.
Thank you so much. Brian?
Yeah, I think the first thing we need to do is we need to stop making the problem worse. We need to make sure that all new housing doesn't continue to, fall into the same mistakes that we did before. And so it's all electrified. In terms of existing housing, I agree with that it's unfair to ask too much of residents. And the only way that it's going to probably get done without being too big of a burden is at the very least, very generous financing from the city or maybe outright subsidies. I think that's pretty much the only way that it's going to be able to be done. In terms of transportation, I think more EV chargers will help accelerate things. I also think that the scooter program that's about to be come into effect could be really helpful so that people don't have to drive that last mile. They could take a scooter. They don't have to go buy an electric vehicle, which is obviously not very inexpensive, and they could just use a scooter for an hour. And yeah.
Thank you. Lisa?
Thank you very much for the question. If I recall, it was about expediting the process to upgrade our grid and increase capacity, and particularly to look at local generation. So in terms of updating the grid, we know that we have a workforce problem. And one of the things I would suggest to do is to reach out to local unions and see if we can get training programs going. This current council has already suggested trying to work with the state on workforce training, but I think we can do a lot here locally. Likewise, for distributed energy resources, I'm very interested in pursuing demand response programs. Our commercial customers use about 80% of our electric supply, and I think there's real potential in demand response programs with our commercial customers. I think we need to continue to incentivize rooftop solar and storage, and the main thing that the city can do there is streamline the process and make it easy to get a permit and easy to pass an inspection, which right now is a huge barrier to adoption in our city. On storage, in addition to Powerwall type storage, I'm super interested in facilitating the use of electric vehicle batteries for local storage. And finally, I still think there's a lot to do at the utility scale. Utility scale storage doesn't pencil out, but we should do a pilot. And similarly, the next time we have the opportunity to procure power, I really want to look at power sources that are grid friendly, like nuclear for baseload and potentially geothermal also for baseload. Thanks.
Thank you so much. Alex?
Yes, the Gray Separation Project will definitely bring electric trains to City of Palo Alto. And if we were to have the option to take the train to have lunch with someone in downtown Burlingame or so, I think we would be inclined to do that, knowing that we have access to an electric train every 5 to 7 minutes. So we don't have to deal with driving, with parking in different downtown areas and so forth. I believe this is by far the largest impacts that we will see when it comes to decarbonization and for City of Palo Alto. Also, I would look into connecting schools, shopping centers, and open spaces, through bike routes. If we have safe routes, more safe routes within our city, we would be more inclined to use bikes. Our kids will be, safer to ride bikes, pretty much anywhere within the City of Palo Alto, maybe even surrounding cities, if we have those routes connecting to Mountain View, Mellow Park, and so forth. Also, incentives when it comes to appliances. This is very imperative to have those in place, especially for a certain level of income. And I can't stress enough that these incentives have to be targeting for very low income, medium income or so. Those are the people that would really need these incentives in order to switch to electric, not only for installation, but only for purchases and also for upgrading whatever they need in order to get those installed. Those could be circuit breakers, could be electrical panels, could be upgrading the line all the way to the street. Lots of incentives we need in place. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Vicky?
Thank you. I also heard the question is asking more specifically about the grid. I had put as my third priority investing in infrastructure to assure the reliability and resilience of our grid. But as the questioner noted, that takes time. So what can we do now that could be quicker? I think we have to get smart. We have to think about a smart grid and modernize some of our equipment so that it can do the demand response. I believe Lisa mentioned that. I also think we can have smart meters. We're rolling some out this fall, but that can reward people who charge at off-peak times, and they can be aware of what they're doing, and they can use that greener energy that happens when the sun is shining during the day and not when everyone plugs in between 4 to 9 or overnight. If we get smart, we can use our cars with our EVs as large batteries, and we can do VTG or VTH, which I understand is vehicle to the grid or vehicle to the home. So you can even charge during the day and put some of that back in the grid. We can also increase the number of EV chargers on public land. We could even do it on some light poles. It's a lower charging rate, but if you don't have off-street parking and you want to have an EV, we can figure out ways to connect that up through city-owned light poles. So I think there's a variety of ways. You also asked about local generation. Again, Lisa mentioned rooftop solar. I agree with that. I think certainly businesses in particular often have large amounts of roof space that could be available to help us do some local generation to give us a backup source while we are upgrading our grid. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Now we'll have Angelina come and give a question.
At times, well-intended decarbonization strategies and policies often overlook the equity implications of solutions. For example, 46% of Palo Altans are renters and have no control over their heating systems or appliances. Yet, policy propositions like natural gas bans ignore that reality and place the pressure on landlords who might be compelled to raise rents. And so, what is your personal philosophy on achieving climate targets while incorporating equity aspects, either using new infrastructure or using existing infrastructure?
Thank you so much. Each candidate has 2 minutes, and we'll start with that.
Yeah, I think the instructions had said that if you speak to that during question 2, you may not speak on question 3. So I guess I'll just add briefly to.
We're running a little ahead of time, so I'm giving everybody equity so they can all speak.
Yeah, no, it's great. I just don't have as much to add to that question. But I do want to add the important aspect of that question that's on the table, which is what about renters? Yes, they're 46%, and I think they're going to be probably 56% very soon, because the new housing that we build here for the lower incomes is going to be mostly rental, I think, by default, because we're not going to be able to build a lot of homes that are, affordable. So that has to be a absolutely primary laser focus. And I think that the plan to have all new homes built, including multifamily homes with energy, with electric energy, gets us there, because then the renter moves in with that stuff already there. They don't have to worry about adding that. So it's really a crucial component of this strategy to electrify apartments and new apartments. Of course, we also want to encourage the landlord to electrify by rehabbing the apartments as well. So I appreciate that angle to the question. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Brian.
Yeah, I think that really is the question about how to do this, because the amount of money involved with upgrading these appliances is non-trivial. It is an amount that would get passed down to renters and their rent. So the real question is how do you do this without impacting people unfairly? And like I said in my last answer, I think the way to do that is definitely really generous financing from the city and or subsidies. I think that if this really is that important to the city, then the city needs to make the decision to support the residents and go through this transition. That's the only way that it's going to be equitable.
Lisa.
I really appreciate the question. I think it's incredibly important to ensure that everybody still has access to energy services at affordable prices. Everyone needs a heated home, hot water, and the ability to get where they need to go as we transform. So I think that the city definitely needs to subsidize. For those residences that are transforming to all electric, there needs to be not just rebates for low-income families, but also simply covering the costs upfront. For middle income, there needs to be financing, low or no interest loans, and extremely easy to follow on-bill financing. And then even if we transition all the single family homes and many of the multifamily homes, there will still be some customers left on natural gas, and it's unfair if they have to bear the increased cost of a really expensive natural gas utility as the only customers left. So I also think that it is likely we will need to expand our rate reduction programs for these customers. And to do so might require an infusion of funds from state and possibly federal grants or something along those lines. I think this is what it means for Palo Alto to lead. We're going to hit these problems probably sooner than other communities, and we're going to be turning to our state and federal legislators for help. And finally, the other thing that I think is important is to also look at equity, not just through the lens of money, but also through time. All these programs that we do should they should be really easy to find out about and should have a maximum of 1-page form that you fill out. It should be extremely accessible and not piles of bureaucracy to get the financial help that you need. Thanks.
Thank you. Alex?
Yes, decarbonization has a huge social impact. It strengthens the economy, supports communities, businesses, workers, maximizes cost effectiveness, and most importantly, it promotes equity and inclusion, especially when it comes to public transportation. Having lived in Europe half of my life, I've used public transportations almost on a daily basis there. And that really addresses the equity and inclusion factor. We kind of felt the same. We took the same bus, from place A to place B. It brings communities together, and I think that's really addresses the equity and inclusion aspect. I'm also going back to incentives when it comes to addressing the renters, the 46% of Palo Alto. I don't think renters would have much control over the process, but I think the city could look into incentivizing landlords actually to upgrade, buildings, complexes when it comes to switching to all electric. So going back to incentives, if say a landlord got 5 different level of incomes when it comes to that rental complex, I think if we have incentives that are based on level of incomes of the renters, then the landlords would be more inclined to invest actually also in their buildings, upgrade their buildings too, so the renters would not be impacted by the fact that their building would be switched from gas to electric. Thank you.
Thank you. Vicky.
Thank you. So if we don't want landlords to pass on the price of this to their tenants, there's 2 ways to address it. One is make it easier and cheaper for the landlords, and the other is to help the tenants. So if we start with the landlords, we should continue to do and expand this on-bill financing for the capital costs so that it's spread out over time and not as expensive. I think we should also smooth and expedite an approval and in essence, a pre-approval process so that things are ready, that when the gas appliance conks out, that we can go ahead and move more quickly on the electric appliance. I think we also ought to look for contractors who can install this at a fair rate and or subsidize that rate so that we reduce the actual cost to the owner. But in addition to that, on the tenant side, we do get money from various state funds. We get state cap and trade funds, and we get gas fees. And those are and should be dedicated to assisting low-income families and help them with this transition and help subsidize higher rates. We can also do projects like the one that won an award at the U.S. Conference of Mayors conference this year. Palo Alto actually got an award for transitioning home heating from gas to electric in a multifamily below market rate place. So what was nice was after the transition happened, the people who lived in the below market rate complex got the benefit of the lower electric rates. So we can do more of those projects because that was a good proof of principle.
Thank you. Doria?
Thank you. So in addition to what I already mentioned about environmental justice, when it comes to renters, I really think we have to support them. I always think we kind of undercount them in the city because there's a lot of informal rental situations that just don't get reported. And I think as things get more and more expensive, we're going to even have more renters. People can't afford down payments now because of the rates. So it's really key that we have financial help and in terms of subsidy to assist in transitions, but also maybe even in relocation. That there may be places in the Bay Area where people have to move because they can't live there anymore. So I think really good development standards and reach codes to improve the experience of living in new buildings and buildings that are nicer to live in and more efficient. One thing that's really important to me, recently we've had such warm summers that people have died from heat exposure. Particularly, we were lucky, but particularly further north in Portland, I think 16 or 19 people died 2 summers back. And it's real tragedy. We have long accepted that in cold climates, like where I'm from, you have to provide heat for your tenant. And I think we have to start thinking about requiring cooling as an essential and moral imperative, actually, for renters, landlords to provide for their tenants as it just keeps getting hotter. So looking into the right to cooling in addition to the right to heating, I think is important.
Thank you so much. We'll now ask Theo to please come forward and answer a question. Again, because we are running ahead of time, I'll ask each candidate to answer the question.
Do you regard housing as an environmental issue? If so, why?
Each candidate has 2 minutes. We'll start with Brian.
I definitely think that it is an environmental issue on many different levels. I think how the house is built is definitely one of the biggest aspects of its environmental impact. And it's not just on the appliances in the house, but all sorts of aspects of the building code and whether or not it's going to be environmentally efficient. That decides on how much you even have to use your heating and cooling. Beyond that, I think that more relevant for maybe this election and what Palo Alto is going through would be where the houses are located. And I think that when you locate housing next to jobs, then you reduce carbon footprint. It just makes sense. You don't have to drive, you don't have to commute. It's just going to have a cascade of positive effects for the environment, really. Those are probably the 2 biggest ones I could think of, but there's many ways that housing impacts the environment.
Lisa?
Housing is 100% an environmental issue. And one of the many reasons is to be close to where you work and to shorten a commute. And the housing itself, of course, can be environmentally constructed or operated. We have a need for good insulation, breathable houses. We've been talking about all electric. And I would say also the thing to remember is that the people are already here, and if they live in town in dense, efficient, affordable housing, then that's a much smaller carbon footprint than if they live out in the Central Valley in a perhaps more sprawling location with a really long commute. So I think any way you look at it, housing is definitely an environmental issue.
Thank you so much. Alex?
Yes, 100%. So the houses will have a huge and long-term effect on climate change. As my colleagues mentioned, when it comes to size of the units, we are looking to building more multifamily complexes, so definitely a smaller footprint, closer to transit hubs, so we reduce traffic. And also, I'm a big fan of mixed-use projects. A couple of my proposals, especially when it comes to Stanford Shopping Center, to be converted into something similar to Santana Row, where you have retail, restaurants, and coffee shops and so forth on the ground level, and you have multifamily on top, 3-4 levels or so. We could have those communities in place so people would actually walk to the coffee shop, to the restaurants, to lots of other neighbors. Also, the net zero houses, we also are miles behind Europe or Scandinavian countries when it comes to building net zero houses. When I built my own house about 10 years ago, I was one of the first ones that was looking into implementing lots of items that we are talking about today, like drip system when it comes to watering, double insulation, 2x6 walls with double insulation, reflective plywood in the attic fan, solar panel, radiant heating system, and so forth. So I think the way we build our houses, it's great, not only for the environment, but also for our own health, with no VOC, less MDF and so forth. I think that's very, very critical for us as well. Thank you.
Thank you. Vicky?
Thank you. So is housing an environmental issue? Definitely yes. Anytime you add a home, change a home, it's going to impact the environment. And that's why we have CEQA and environmental impact statements and the like. But if so, then why? Well, we've been talking a lot about the greenhouse gas emissions from buildings and ways to mitigate that and electrify to get away from fossil fuels. But there's also the construction of homes. Transitioning to low carbon concrete would be a huge step in the right direction. That is a massive carbon problem when we use regular concrete. Where it's located, putting it near transit is a way to mitigate some of the environmental impacts of it. Also, having it set back from streams, there's another environmental impact that we should worry about. And where possible, if we go up instead of out, that also can help our environment. We can avoid heat islands and we can do all kinds of things if we take care of our tree canopy and don't have open asphalt parking lots. We should also think about things like bird-safe glass in our homes and things about our external lighting to comply with dark sky ordinances and provisions. There are so many ways that housing and homes and their construction and their daily use interact with the environment that it's something we should definitely take into account in all aspects.
Thank you. Gloria?
So absolutely, housing is an environmental issue. Most of these ideas have been mentioned, but I also think that it's important for people to have an option, not to have to drive to everything that they need. That's important. I think adaptive reuse of old buildings is a really interesting idea. Not making any new concrete and not having to haul old concrete to somebody else's neighborhood to get rid of it is a really great idea. I'm particularly interested in the dark skies concept and bird safe glass. And also when I worked on the comp plan on the natural environment subcommittee, we got more creek protection put in there. It was kind of hard, but we did do that. So let's hope that gets into the municipal code soon. And then another thing to remember about housing is that backyards provide habitat for native species. Since I have more time, I'll just talk a little bit about affordable housing, which is the kind of housing I think we need the most in this town, and some improvements we could make there. We already require 15% in multifamily buildings to be affordable units. I believe that should go up to 20%, and I believe we'll be able to apply it soon to for sale and for rent units. The council has already said they were going to consider that. And I think that, but we have to be very creative and think about other ways. The Planning Commission just made a recommendation to the City Council to consider looking at deed restricted ADUs, so we could have some affordability guaranteed in ADUs. I think that would really help. So those are some of the ideas that I have about housing. Thanks.
Ed?
Okay, thank you. I think as many of you know, I'm co-chair of the Housing Element Working Group with Cheryl Klein, and that was assembled to take a look at what our real housing needs are going forward, and as well as where should they be put. So the most obvious, first of all, I would say it's always, by the way, connected to transportation. You can't have housing without transportation, and that's why it's always environmental. And the most obvious climate-friendly solution for this is to place higher density multifamily housing in high transit areas. And those three areas right now are our downtown, our El Camino, and our California Ave. And we did that on the Housing Working Group. We saw it again on the Planning Commission. We did that. When it got to council, they chose to delay housing right on the downtown transit center to couple that with a complete downtown area plan. So I understand that goal, but I disagree with it because of speed. I think we could have done that in parallel, the plan, as well as evaluating. Otherwise, we have to wait 9 years to even start thinking about housing there, which is the kind of most obvious place, I think, in our city. We still did list housing sites downtown, and those are still in the housing inventory. And placing housing near transit was not going to be the panacea because we can't get up to 6,000 units that is demanded by the state with just housing, right near transit. So, but on transportation, I just want to comment that we always were looking to ensure that two-wheel mobility is safely planned for in all new housing developments. We always want to reduce single occupancy vehicle travel. And note, this is not a comment on parking or car ownership. It's distinct from that, but we want, even if you own a car, we want you out of the car as much as possible. And lastly, I said before, but green building materials is the way to go.
Thank you. Okay, Theo has a follow-up question. And after Theo asks, we'll ask Lisa to start off, and each candidate has 2 minutes.
What adaptation policies would you like to incorporate as Palo Alto continues to experience more wildfires and increased flooding risks?
We have a lot of work to do for adaptation to the inevitable effects of the climate change that's already happened and will continue to happen despite our best efforts. We need to continue to underground all the power lines up in the foothills so that we don't spark an accidental wildfire. One of the nice things about encouraging heat pumps, which we're already doing, is that they can serve as air conditioning, which is going to be increasingly necessary, not just for hot temperatures, but when air quality is really bad due to wildfires that have blown bad air into our region. And so we can't open our windows. We definitely need to reinforce a lot of the infrastructure that we have down by the bay, which is vulnerable to sea level rise. We have a lot of important utilities equipment there. We have our water treatment plant there. We need to continue projects to widen the area under our bridges along our creeks to protect against flooding. I'd really like to see a horizontal levee go in down in the bay to protect against storm surges. And this will also very nicely improve local wildlife habitat. And finally, I think we really need to incentivize conversion to low water landscaping while continuing to care for our trees, because drought is definitely the new normal and we all need to be making do with less water. The other thing on that one is we need to explore recycled water, gray water, and I'm particularly interested in on-site water recycling at commercial facilities. I think that has a lot of potential for water savings. Thank you.
Thank you. Alex?
Yes, the biggest damage to the wildlife habitat is definitely the rising risk of wildfires. That should be one of the city's top priorities going forward in order to preserve our existing wildlife habitat. Especially when it comes to switching to electrification, we really need to invest and to adapt to electrification by investing in our power grid in order to have redundancy in place. We have experienced lately a few power shortages, and we haven't experienced those a few years back. So I'm afraid that the more switching to electrification happens, the more likely we will experience those power outages. So I truly believe that investing in a power grid, I think it's essential. When it comes to flooding, we are talking again about the water crisis in general, and the water storage comes in play again. We need new levees in order to prevent flooding, first of all. We need a system in order to store water potentially in our creeks, for future use. I truly believe we should look into this water storage system and to treat that more like a battery. You store energy for later use. That's really smart water management, and we really need that going forward in our city. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Vicky.
So as we've been discussing, we need to do all we can to minimize greenhouse gas emissions that contribute to sea level rise, wildfires, extreme weather events, and more. But there's no question it is here to stay, and so we also have to adapt. So Palo Alto has a sea level rise adaptation policy. I believe it was put in place in 2019 and completed a sea level rise vulnerability assessment this past summer. So at present, there's an adaptation policy that's expected to come to council in the next couple of months. One aspect of that is levee protection. And to do that effectively, I believe we should also cooperate with other governments around the Bay. I too would like to see a natural horizontal levee system incorporated as part of that, as opposed to just a hard seawall. I think that that's more adaptable to storm surges and such. Also, to address the risk to public safety, we need to take a look at the 50-year projection for sea level rise and adapt our building codes to it. We're going to have to take that into account for new projects and developments that come along. We also should take a look at, with sea level rise, there's going to be increasing salination of our groundwater. So that's another water concern that we need to address as part of our adaptation. For fire, we have undergrounded most of our power lines up in the foothills, and that's a good thing because of the sparks that Lisa mentioned. And we also have new emergency communications for that. But we may need, it's expensive to underground power lines, so we can't do it everywhere. But for this, where there's the greatest fire danger, we need to continue to be vigilant and underground them where necessary. And also, we unfortunately have more dead trees because of the low water table we have, and those we'll have to watch and remove more regularly in order to avoid increasing wildfires.
Thank you, Doria.
So yes, cities. Sorry. Cities must have mitigation plans for both of these problems: sea level rise, flooding, and also wildfires. So the city is developing a sea level rise adaptation plan, as was mentioned in 2023. And I just signed up to be attending those meetings myself so I can learn more about what we're doing. We already have bridge improvements that will allow better flow through San Francisco Creek. We already have plans for a horizontal levee. We need to really understand the value of natural shorelines and marshes when it comes, and how wetlands provide a better buffer from sea level rise. We need to rethink if we want to put more buildings out east of 101. And let's see, when it comes to wildfires, I think every city should have a plan in this regard also, to identify problem areas and address them, as we're trying to do out in the foothills. Education, education, education. You know, we should have codes and ordinances that support resilient structures. People need to be educated about defensible space around structures and not storing flammable materials. I actually think we also, I'll add here that I believe we need to restore our fire staff to better staffing levels.
Thank you so much. Ed.
Yes, thanks. Sea level rise, as I mentioned briefly before, is serious. I'm glad the plan is finally coming forward. We need to get that thing signed up and to keep the waves from coming over us. We definitely, I agree with a couple of the previous comments. We definitely don't want to be focusing on flood walls and levees. The kind of wetlands is the natural way to do it and gives us more flexibility. So that's definitely the way to go. I think we also have to address not only tidal flooding, but also groundwater rise. That's going to be another complicating factor. So with respect to adaptation, first of all, we can't build in those foothills. Stanford has to hear that. We cannot build in those foothills. Secondly, during the season, sounds pretty simple, but it's true. And it wasn't done for a long time because it wasn't done when I was on parks. We got to clear the brush, and that takes a lot of money, and it wasn't funded. So finally, it's gotten funded with the CIP program, Capital Improvement Program monies, and it's now being done. Simple preventative measures, which are obviously very effective. And then third, we'd like to get some early warning signs if a fire does start there. And then lastly, and I'll go a step beyond the question, if all that doesn't work, we better make sure we're investing in firefighters. which we also didn't do during the pandemic. And we didn't even have a crew that could go up there without and partner with another organization to get the numbers fire persons up there that were needed to address it. So that we can't be cutting fire budgets as a last resort. Thanks.
Thank you so much. We now are getting to our Q&A time. This will be an open free for all.
Did you want me to answer that one too?
I will recognize the first three hands I see.
You want me to answer the
Oh,
last
sorry,
question?
Brian. I'm sorry. Brian, sorry.
No problem. In terms of wildfires, I definitely, I don't know what percentage is already undergrounded in the foothills, but it should be 100% for sure. And that should happen immediately. I also think that undergrounding utilities just in general throughout the city, it's more aesthetically pleasing, it's more reliable. Where it's doable, we should definitely make that change and we should do that. I think that has long-term benefits, even though it is expensive. I think we definitely need firefighters, but what we really need is we need firefighters living in Palo Alto. Affordable housing is not going to be the solution for that, but we need to come up with some way that firefighters and other public safety officials can live in this city, because otherwise, if there is a major disaster, earthquake, fires, they're going to go home to where they live and we're going to be on our own. So it's a security issue. We need to figure it out. We need these people living here. We also need teachers living here. In terms of flooding, I used to live at Oak Creek Apartments over on the creek, and I've seen what happens when it rains heavy and you're just watching the creek every hour and hoping that it doesn't overflow. I don't know what the solution is, but we definitely need to figure one out, and we need to make sure that there's a much greater buffer before that overflows. And then in terms of sea level rise and groundwater rise, that's something that definitely needs to be addressed. I think I've seen what happens at the underpass at Embarcadero and Oregon Expressway when it rains really heavy, and that's just going to get worse as the sea level rises and the groundwater rises. And it needs to be taken into consideration when we decide how to do the grade separation, because if underpasses are going to be utilized there, we need to make sure that we take into account the fact that there is going to be worsening flooding in those kind of urban features. So, yeah.
Thank you so much. I apologize. Sorry. We now get to our question and answer time. We'll be receiving questions and answers from online and in the room. If you'd like to ask a question, please write it out and give it to Anna. Anna, raise your hand. So great. We have 15 questions, so we ask that each person please take 1 minute. It's going to be free for all. Whoever raises their hand first is the person I'll call. So as Julie comes forward, thank you.
So there's a lot of fear, uncertainty, and doubt about switching to electric. What role should the city play to engage and educate residents on this transition?
Say that again, please.
Oh, sorry. There's a lot of fear, uncertainty, and doubt about switching to electric. What role should the city play to engage and educate residents on this transition?
Vicky.
Well, here's a commercial. There's a fabulous electrification workshop coming up in another week that the city is putting on for exactly that reason, because people are concerned or afraid or don't know how to do it, whether it'll cost more, all of those kinds of things. So truly the city has taken the lead in educating, and I think we should continue to do those things from time to time to take the fear out of it.
Anyone else? Adam?
I think the key word that I'd answer is knowledge. As we find things out and as we have programs, we have to get that across to our residents. There's a real mixed reception to what we're talking about doing here. Some people are very gung-ho. Some people are very nervous. I was with a group of residents earlier today, and the first answer was, I know it's going to cost more. I know it's going to be really inconvenient, and I'm not sure this is really going to help climate change. Well, we know that there's some answers to that, but as we move forward, let's package those up and get them out and get some information so that folks get on board.
Victoria?
I also think it's really important to keep stressing that it's a transition. It's not, no one's taking the gas ability away tomorrow and pulling out the gas pipes. That's not what the city has in mind. So to take that fear aspect away, and like we all said, or many of us said, we should make sure that we have some way to subsidize the cost of this for people who can't afford it.
Thank you. Next question. Oh, so you want to answer this? Go. We
If
got
I
time.
may,
Yes, go.
quickly. Absolutely education is important. I would actually say, I do think we need to let people know that we are going to be eventually shutting down the natural gas utility, but not tomorrow, but it is coming. We need to address the cost issue with heavy subsidies. And we have to address the convenience issue with making it really, really easy and convenient. And I think we also have the opportunity to sell it as something awesome. Natural gas is horrible for indoor air quality, and this is a way to modernize the interior of your home. And I also like to think we can do it kind of neighborhood by neighborhood or block by block and combine retiring the natural gas with undergrounding the power and potentially adding fiber for those neighborhoods that need it and just sell it as an overall upgrade.
Alex?
Yeah, the best thing that could happen to our city is actually what's happening tonight. We have a group of young individuals involved in climate change. They will spread the word for decades to come. They will have habits, that will be carried for decades to come. So I truly believe that whatever these guys are doing today, it's one of the best things that could have happened for the city at the climate change level. Yeah, thank you.
Okay, next question. Oh. Is climate action your #1 priority? If not, what number does it rank in and why? Dory?
So climate has to be a #1 priority because without addressing this, and it's too late already, but without addressing this, nothing else really matters, So I'm just going to leave it there.
Thank you. Vicky? No, who else? Yeah, Lisa? Okay, sorry.
As I said at the start, my 3 priorities are housing, transportation, and climate, but those are actually all climate. The reason I feel that housing is pressing aside from the moral imperative is that all roads lead back to housing, same with transportation. And so, yes, it's my #1, my #2, and my #3.
Thank you. Anyone else? Vicky?
Yeah, I would agree with it that way. Housing is critical, but climate and housing are so intertwined, as we discussed before, that to me, they're both at #1. But I wanted to just add that electrification workshop is on October 15th, 10 to 1 at Mitchell Park.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Ed?
Just briefly, there is no tomorrow if we don't fix the climate problem.
Anyone else? Okay. What would you do to speed up permitting of DERs in Palo Alto, improve staff, or allocate move? I think that's what it says. Or allocate more, sorry, allocate more. You want me to repeat? What would you do to speed up permitting of DERs in Palo Alto? And then they said, improve staff, allocate more. I can only read the card. Okay, let's try the next one. Oh, okay, Lisa, why don't you try?
I think one of the reasons it's hard and maybe we're all hesitating is it feels like one of those things that's more operational than policy. Like I think we all understand that we need to make it, we need to speed up permitting, and we know it's broken. It's just harder to come up with an ordinance that fixes it. I think part of it is just really letting city management know that this is a huge priority and council has their back, whatever it takes to solve this problem that's been around for years.
Thank you. Anyone else? Okay. How do we reduce carbon and conserve water while the city needs to add, I think they meant 6,000, but they said 60,000 housing units in the next decade?
Could you reread that?
How do we reduce carbon and conserve water while the city needs to add 60,000 housing units in the next decade? It's 6,000, but Dory.
Well, I said it earlier, but I think we have to start really planning to reuse water, not just to use it once. So, and the city is taking steps to have a new water facility and delivery system. So I'll leave it at that.
Okay, Vicky.
Yeah, I just wanted to mention that, it was a month ago or so, the mayor of Bloomington, Indiana was here as part of the Sibling Cities USA program. And he took a tour of our water reclamation recycling plant and was told that our water usage has gone down so much, we've been good at this, that there's a lot of extra capacity there. So we want to continue to be good and get better because we obviously have the problems we've been discussing. But there is capacity to continue to treat water to meet our needs.
Thank you. Lisa?
One of the things I think it's important to point out is that when we add, I think they meant to say 6,000 housing units.
Yes, I think that's the number.
When people live here, they can live water efficiently. When they're living someplace else far away, it's much harder to be water efficient. And so it's a great use of water to build housing here in Palo Alto. We actually have a significant allocation from our water source, the SFPUC, which our water comes from Hetchy, so there's no worry about it running out. That said, of course, we still want to do all the recycling conservation efforts we've been talking about. And the other thing to point out is that dense multifamily housing is much more water efficient than single family housing. So that's really, I don't see any reason not to add the housing that we need to add out of a concern for water.
Thank you so much. Anyone else? Alex?
Yeah, so adding 6,000 units, it's roughly adding 25% of the current households we have in the city. So it's a huge impact for the next 8 years or so. Mixed use projects, smaller footprint, definitely. But when it comes to water, I cannot emphasize enough that smart city water equals water storage. So we really need to address water storage. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Anyone? Okay. If elected, how would you go about getting Palo Altans to upgrade their panels before they install new electric appliances? Alex?
It goes back to incentives. As I mentioned before, we really need to look at so many levels of incentives for landlords, for renters, but also for so many level of incomes. And yes, it's a domino effect. You want to change your water heater, then you need a circuit breaker, then you need an electrical panel. So once of a sudden, it's a $4K project turns into a 20,000 project. So unfortunately, those expenses cannot be offset unless we have huge incentives. I did some research actually right before this meeting on incentives nationwide, and they are, I believe, at 30% of the level where we should have those in place to really make a huge impact long term. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else? Brian?
Yeah, I think most of the time they won't have a choice. If they want to upgrade these appliances, they pretty much have to upgrade their panels. And I just think that that's an important fact to keep in mind as we push towards these goals, because it is going to be an additional impact on these homeowners.
Vicki?
Yeah, just briefly. But I wouldn't want us to get ahead of ourselves with the need for upgrade, because as technology is improving, we're getting more and more efficient appliances that don't create quite the demand to do the same job. And that's true with EVs too. Some people have over upgraded beyond what we need. So we need to be informed and judicious about that as well.
Thank you much. Anyone else? Okay. This is a question. Would you launch a campaign to educate residents on the environmental and climate impacts of their food choices? Food choices. Okay, let Vicki start.
I just say quickly, I love this question. My daughter is all about this. I have to say the Palo Alto Public Schools did a fabulous job of making her, motivating her to read The Omnivore's Dilemma. And so she lectures me on this all of the time. So I have to say yes, because she may be watching.
Thank you. Dorian?
Yeah, so I think I already expressed my sort of long time interest in this very subject, and the fact that I chose not to eat meat a very long time ago. And my mother said, okay, as long as I didn't get sick. And so she had to agree, but it's a really important problem. And it also, but I don't want to make it kind of a judgmental, a judgment on people who have less money to spend on fancy choices of food.
Mhm.
So there's an equity issue there as well for me.
Thank you. Lisa?
Food choices are super important, but I don't think it's the role of city council to educate people on their food choices. I think this is very well left to the schools or maybe other organizations. I think on city council, we have to have a pretty relentless focus on housing, transportation, and the gas utility, and we can't solve all the problems all the time.
Thank you. Alex?
One of the best documentaries I've ever watched is the Game Changers, and I really recommend that to everyone tonight. It's really around a plant-based system that was designed for athletes, and apparently specific teams perform a lot better when it comes to sports in general, but they are really showing the long-term effects of eating plant-based protein, and that apparently has a huge impact on the climate change as well. I also want to mention that I used to go a lot to my grandma's farm when I was their age, and they didn't actually waste almost anything. The leftovers from the food that they had on the table went straight to the animals they had on the farm. So I think that was a great concept looking back. Thank you.
Thank you.
Just one quick
Yes,
comment.
sir.
Yeah, I think in this case, one of the things I've said about council in general is we need to set our key priorities, one of which is climate change. Within that, we have to emphasize the key priorities to get that message out. And if that was one of them, then I think we would emphasize that. But I think relative to all the other ones we talked about tonight and that are in the SCAP, that probably is better left to other jurisdictions.
Thank you so much. EVs. What do you see the EVs as both as growing electricity use and as a potential storage vehicle for balancing power to local electricity? And in addition, how you keep up the maintenance of the EV chargers? I can only read what's on the card. You want me to read it again? Okay, let's try again. What do you see the EVs as both as growing electricity use and as a potential storage vehicle for balancing the local electricity? And in addition, how you keep the maintenance of these EV chargers? Tori?
So others have mentioned it, but EVs, electric vehicles can be charged and then you can use that to charge other things. I was at a block party last weekend, I think, where they were running the popcorn machine off a Rivian truck. It was cute.
Thank you. Yes, Vicki.
Yeah, it's the V to G and V to H technology that I was mentioning earlier, and it's almost like distributed fuel storage. So the fact that we all have these giant batteries or will soon sitting in our driveways is something that we could take advantage of and should once we get the smart technology for a smart grid.
Ed?
Yeah, I agree. This isn't Disneyland stuff. This is stuff that's really here and working. I saw the same popcorn going. So I think that it's a question of just kind of commercializing that and making it more less costly, and then we're home on that.
Thank you. Let's go with Alex and Lisa.
Yeah, I think the most important aspect is to look into how the energy gets into the EVs. If we charge the EV from a regular power outlet, I don't think that's really an efficient system. So I think we really have to look into charging those EVs through the solar system, so we could store that energy for later use. I think that's very critical. If again, if we charge those EVs from regular sources, that's yeah, I mean, it defeats the whole purpose of the question. Thank you.
Lisa?
Yeah, I am definitely interested in pilot programs that use electric vehicle batteries as a backup storage for the home or for the grid. But honestly, there's lower hanging fruit, which is just to manage the time that electric vehicles are charged. The worst possible time to charge is right when you get home from work and plug them in at 5, 6, 7 o'clock at night when the grid is under stress. As we've seen this summer, we were all asked to lower our power usage from 4 to 9 p.m. So really programs that just incentivize charging during the day, during peak solar time, it would be, I think, priority number one. But as a fast follow, programs to make use of the car battery could be interesting as well. And as far, I didn't entirely understand the maintenance question, but I think it's worth mentioning. It's come up here already. We don't always need really high power fast chargers, and especially in apartment complexes. I'm excited about lower power chargers because then it's much less expensive and you can have one for every single parking space in the complex.
Thank you so much. This is the final question of the evening. What have you done in your own life to demonstrate your recognition that climate change is a crisis for humanity? What is your vision for addressing equitability and local adaptations to climate change over the next 8 to 10 years? You want me to read that again? What have you done in your own life to demonstrate your recognition that climate change is a crisis for humanity? What is your vision for addressing equitability in local adaptations to climate change over the next 8 to 10 years? We'll go to Alex, then Brian, and Lisa, then Vicky,
Yes.
then Ed.
During my real estate career, I was involved in so many projects where we converted specific sites into multifamily projects, and the small footprint of those units will have a huge effect long-term on the climate change. So I really feel great about that. When it comes to, again, building my house, I really implemented everything I could in order to be an example for others when it comes to building and addressing climate change as well. And again, when it comes to equity that you mentioned, I really have to refer again to the incentives that we really have to promote so they could be implemented effectively over the next few years so we could have a smooth transition to electrification. Thank you.
Thank you. Who's next?
Yeah, on a personal level, I guess my wife and I decided to get rid of our second car about 5 years ago. We just only have one car now. And in conjunction with that, decided to just anywhere we're going in Palo Alto, we're going to bike to, which works about 80% of the time. Also replaced our, when we bought our house, one of the first things we did was replace the back lawn with artificial turf. Still working on doing the front lawn, but those are some of the kind of things that I've personally done.
Lisa?
About 10 years ago, I was so worried about climate change that I quit my job at Pixar and went back to school to get a degree in environment and resources because I really wasn't sure how I could do something about it. And I felt like the first thing I needed to do was learn. That's why I started serving on the Utilities Commission, because I had figured out that energy use is a huge part of the climate change nexus. And it's a not small part of why I'm running for city council, because I believe that local government has enormous power to affect change. A lot of people ask me, why does Palo Alto's carbon footprint matter? I think it hugely matters because we have the opportunity to lead. And I've seen on the Utilities Commission how other cities, all the cities are watching each other. What did Berkeley do? What did Menlo Park do? What is San Jose doing? And if we take a leadership role, we can be a template for other cities to follow. And the more cities there are doing the right things, then the more likely that the state will pass legislation that lowers our the state carbon footprint. And California is the 5th largest economy in the world. And so I really feel like Palo Alto has the opportunity to make a difference globally, not just here in our little city.
Thank you. Vicky?
So I've done a variety of things. Like many people, I've adopted an electric vehicle. Started in 2015. Talked my husband into it. He has a plug-in EV because he just got a job with a longer commute and thought that we should do that. We actually have adjusted our diet to have less meat in it because agriculture does account for 15% of our greenhouse gases. But mostly, I've tried to serve in places where, in public office, where I could affect change. That's why it was a large part of why I ran for the state assembly in 2016. And it's a huge motivating factor in looking to serve here now in Palo Alto, because Palo Alto really is a climate leader. And I'm happy to say that I've been working with the city to, we're going to have a climate summit soon, and I've invited the Assistant Secretary for the Department of Energy to come, and he's going to come to Palo Alto in November. And so we can all learn from him then. And my time's up.
Thank you. Ed?
Yeah, my list got longer while other people were talking. So I just want to talk about first parks. You know, I spent 7 years on parks, and that was always a driving force of every park we put in place, permeable pavement. It had to do with maintaining the baylands, adding more park space for canopy, tree ordinance. That was just kind of my life's focus there for 7 years. On an individual basis, you know, we don't have air conditioning. I've only ever had an electric lawnmower, which I push myself. We are now 50% electrical fleet because we got an electric car about 2 years ago, and about 85% of the miles are that way, accomplished by having the office close to home. One of the offices is in the home and the other one was Stanford, so we were able to pull that off. So I think sort of the modeling of concrete behavior right in town is kind of what I've tried to do on top of the work that I've done on parks.
Victoria?
Yeah, so I really have spent like the last 15 years starting in working at my neighborhood association, and then later on various city working groups and committees and commissions. And it's just that sense of public service. I'm here today because this is such an important issue, and I want to continue and be a part of a city council that's going to really help guide us as well as we can through this horrible problem, global problem. I mean, so, and I think my whole life I've made a commitment to living in walkable areas and not taking the car when I don't need to. I really enjoy walking. I'm not as big a biker because I'm afraid of getting hit by a car. But it's really true that, you know, taking the time to be here, taking the time to fill out millions of questionnaires, that shows commitment to solving problems in and of itself.
Okay, anyone else? Okay. I would like to first take a moment to thank these amazing young people, Katie, Angelina, Anna, Hillary, Julia, Maya, and Theo, for the phenomenal work. I also want to thank each and every candidate. We know that public service is more of a burden than any no. If you serve on a commission and you get that packet every month, you're going to get a bigger packet if you get to city council. So we are hopeful for each of you, and we're grateful for the time. Right now, we do have, we'll be here till 9 o'clock before they turn off the lights. We do have some treats in the back. We encourage people to hang out and stay around. And do you have anything? Mm-hmm.
All right, let's see if this works. Oh, no. Well, it did work. So before we sign off, we just wanted to thank Reverend Coloma Smith for being our amazing MC. Can we please get a round of applause for him? Thank you. And then one last huge thank you to the candidates and the student moderators. And for the candidates, thank you guys so much for your time and your wonderful responses. If you are interested in supporting any of the candidates, we do have a couple of tables back there with signs and some other cool gear. So if we can just give one final hand to everyone who made this event possible. And also to our wonderful audience for being here. Thank you guys so much for your wonderful questions. Like we said, we will be tuning off in 9. So if you want to stick around and ask the candidates a couple more questions, hopefully they're down for that. Sorry in advance. Otherwise, thank you guys so much. Let me know if you have any other questions.